But what would it be in Blighty if we didn't talk about travel chaos? Because that has become a big marker, hasn't it, of 2023. And who else to check in with than the gorgeous and wonderful Simon Calder, travel correspondent for The Independent, Britain's favourite travel expert. Simon, how are you doing today, and how gridlocked is Britain? And more train passengers possibly facing disruption this weekend. What's the health check on the roads and rails?
OK, well, look, what a lovely introduction, Alex. I'm feeling much better than I did a moment ago, and that's entirely because of you. I'm lucky enough to be in Narbonne in southern France, where trains are running absolutely normally. Les cheminots, who are not averse, I've noticed, to strike action, are actually working perfectly normally, and that's all good. Completely the opposite in England, and I stress that because Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, their railways are running more or less normally, except in Wales and Scotland, where it's a route that English train operators run on. Well, those trains are going to be busier than usual because there are likely to be many cancellations. Here we are, 400 days on from the start of the first national rail strikes in the UK since the 1980s. And there is no sign in sight of any end to the dispute. Indeed, the RMT union this morning said, yeah, we haven't heard from the employers since April, no talks scheduled. And so they just keep striking. They say, we want a decent pay increase. We haven't had one for 4 years, and we want it no strings. Yeah, we'll talk after you've given us a decent pay rise about possible productivity increases, which they would see as cuts. The government, meanwhile, is looking at the complete disaster that is railway finances after the COVID pandemic, with, in particular, the kind of bedrock of season ticket sales collapsing. So that's an extra couple of £1 billion that at the moment you and me and everyone else who pays taxes is having to bail out the railways. So the government says you can only have a modest increase, and you're only getting that if you are prepared to make changes to working arrangements. Well, that hit stalemate. The RMT said, we're not going to put your paltry offer to our members, and so it's going to keep on striking. Meanwhile, ASLEF, the train drivers union, I hope you're paying attention, Alex, there's going to be a test later. ASLEF are staging a series of overtime bans, which generally run from Monday to Saturday, and indeed the one which starts this coming Monday is going to knock out trains to Brighton, which is staging a huge Pride event on Saturday. Southern Rail says that they cannot run enough services to cope with demand, and unfortunately it's going to be they're not going to be going there at all for public safety.
So travel misery, in essence, to continue. A strike action, industrial action does continue. I mean, if people are planning a trip this weekend, next weekend, what is the likelihood of their train turning up? Should they just turn up at the station, check beforehand, or is it just doom and gloom?
Oh, look, there are lots of trains running, and this is the really interesting thing. It's almost as though there's just a much reduced service. So if you look, for instance, at the East Coast Main Line, that's between London, Yorkshire, North East England and Scotland. Now, there's a private company, Lumo, which is running trains as normal. On top of that, LNER, which is a nationalised company, are running probably about half their normal services to Edinburgh, to Leeds, and those services are actually proving pretty reliable. And it's as though the train companies are thinking, well, look, we're not going to carry on with these negotiations. We're just going to keep taking the strikes, and gradually the number of people returning to work will increase, and we'll be able to run more trains. But of course, stuck in the middle of all this, the poor old passenger who just feels as though they are being taken for a ride in every sense. So miserable times, and every day this goes on, every day there's another strike or an overtime ban, it's more people who just give up on the railways just at the time when the railway needs all the customers they can get. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but I thought it was all going to be over by last Christmas. I'll be glad if it's over by this Christmas, frankly.
Yeah, gosh, 400 days. We're becoming like the French and turning striking into a national sport. On the subject of France, where you are, there were rumours that the air traffic controllers of France were all going to go on strike, as they like to routinely do almost every summer, meaning we can pretend to be marooned and not have to go back to work and find ourselves in sunnier climes. What's going on with foreign travel right now, with wildfires, with air traffic controller strikes? Are planes operating as they should be?
They are, actually. I've just been checking, Alex, and the one I look at first of all is always Gatwick, because that one is the airport with the highest pressure. It's the busiest runway in the world. Things working okay today, apart from flights to Catania in Sicily, because the airport closed there because of a fire. It's partially reopened, but is only open to airlines from the EU, so that doesn't include us at the moment. Roads getting back to normal, except in the area where we reported last week of those terrible fires. Indeed, TUI resumed operations there. Loads of cheap deals around, actually, and I can confirm that Brits have been snapping up, holidays for under £300, peak season per person for a week in the Med, if you're prepared to go to Rhodes, which I certainly would be. Can we just look at the Dover? We heard in the travel news just now that there are long queues on the A20 and the A2 approaches to the port of Dover. That's because it's peak season. Again, there's as discussed this time last summer, we insisted after the democratic vote to leave the European Union on imposing a hard EU frontier in Kent, between the White Cliffs of Dover and the Channel. There isn't very much room for it. Queues build up. They hit a maximum today of 2 hours 30 minutes to get through French passport control, because we said we want to have our passports stamped and checked, please, and that takes a great deal of time. And they've since diminished to about 45 minutes, but it sounds from hearing the talk traffic news there that actually it's taking a bit of time to get to the French frontier post. The good news is that unlike a flight, if you stuck in a queue for security and you miss your flight, you're in big trouble and it's going to cost you. If you miss your ferry, it's no fuss, no cost. You just automatically get put on the next available ship. But sitting around in a queue of traffic for 2.5 hours in Dover is not my idea of fun.
Yeah, not mine either, Simon. Always great to catch up with you and get all the travel updates.